Okay, we talked about the short run. We did all of our shifting, all of the stuff that happened up to this point. If government increases its spending, we shift to the right on our aggregate demand. We end up in an inflationary gap. If something happens like investment falls and our aggregate demand shifts to the left of our long run aggregate supply, we end up in a recessionary gap. Those things happen, but not in the long run. In the long run, everything fixes itself in time. So in the long run, everything is going to return back to the long run aggregate supply. If consumer spending increases, what will happen in the short run and the long run? Well, consumer spending, here we have our aggregate demand curve. C is a big part of our aggregate demand curve. We'd be shifting to the right, right? Aggregate demand moves to the right, which means our quantities, oh, I had that good pen. I think this is still the good pen. Our quantity of GDP goes up, so we are having growth in our income. We're also having less unemployment. We're moving over here, but the side effect is, yep, this is not the right pen. The side effect is we have inflation in the short run. This one's not much better, but we're rolling with it. We have inflation in the short run. So step one is always going to be a short run change. GDP grew, natural rate of unemployment, or we're beyond our natural rate of unemployment, so our unemployment is lower than normal, and our price levels went up. Step one, our first shift, short run. Long run, we're going to have a second shift. When we look at second shift, I know, mind is going to get blown. Second shift always comes from analyzing price level. And the whole reason we spent that whole unit 2 talking about inflation is to handle this. Long run, what's going to happen in the long run? If there's inflation, what do you have to do to your boss? Yo, Copo, give me a raise, right? Second shift is always going to come from an effect on the price level. Price level went up, I need to ask for a raise. If I ask for a raise, my wage has gone up, right? I am now a more expensive resource. Therefore, my second shift comes from my aggregate supply. My aggregate supply would shift which direction if my wage goes up? Down, which is which direction? Left. So in the long run, we will return to our long run aggregate supply. Step one, we make our shift according to what happens up here, whatever the scenario is. In this case, and I'm going to back this all the way up. In this case, our shift was aggregate demand going to the right. Consumers increase their spending. Awesome. Our unemployment rate went down. We went beyond our natural rate of unemployment, and our price level went up. Step two is to adjust to the long run. In the long run, wages and resource prices are going to be affected by price level. So every worker is going to go, oh, I need a raise. And that raise affects our aggregate supply, a resource, so we shift to the left. Yes?
So essentially, what you're going to do is it may just it's just going to move up. The equilibrium point's going to move up and down on the LRAS, but the LRAS just
Stays exactly where it's at.
But then, could you shorten it and not do two shifts if your aggregate?
Use your words.
Getting way too into this.
Don't get too into it. Step one, we're going to have something that affects our economy in the short run, which is going to either push us into an inflationary gap or a recessionary gap. And then we're going to analyze the change in price level to see what workers are going to do and how they respond, which will result in a change in our aggregate supply, either to the right or to the left. I saw a question up over here. Yes? Yep. We're always going to pull us back to where we should be producing because you can't, it's called natural rate of unemployment for a reason, 4 to 6%. We can't always exist over here. At some point, we're always going to have to come back to our full employment line where it's happy. Another way to take a look at this is whenever they say long run always means long run aggregate supply, and long run is right here. it's always going to happen with our aggregate supply. You can cheat, right? You know, uh-oh, he said long run. That means I got to get back here, right? If you get back here, you're like, okay, how do I get back here? Well, if I move aggregate supply to the right, that didn't work. That's the wrong way. I need to get back. So the yeah, so you're going to return back this way. So you just spot where the long run aggregate supply is. You know that something's going to happen this way if you can't remember. And then you can backwards work, right? You'd be like, oh, okay, I see what happened. Price levels went up. There's where we're at. Heck yeah. Now our next example is down. So let's take a look at another example. If consumer spending decreases, what will happen in the short run and the long run? Short run, consumer spending, that's aggregate demand. We're going to shift to the left. In this case, our quantity of output is going to go down. Our price level also goes down. The way I like to look at this one, I go, okay, my unemployment rate is now higher than my natural rate of unemployment. There's people that are out there that don't have a job, right? You don't want to say, well, price levels drop. People are going to go into their office and say, hey, boss, price levels are dropping. The value of my current wage is higher than it should be. You might want to cut my salary. Ain't nobody going to say that, right? But the way I look at it, let's say if this is 4 to 6% unemployment and this is 8% unemployment, these homies right here, they're thinking, I hate not having a job. I'm willing to work for less, right? So they might get rehired at a firm at a smaller income. Therefore, the wage will be lower. A decrease in wages would shift our aggregate supply to the right. Price level goes up, people ask for a raise. Aggregate supply shifts to the left. Price levels go down, wages get dropped, we shift to the right. We always come back to our long run aggregate supply. I like long run aggregate supply because it sits right there. Now, this is assuming the government doesn't do anything. In the long run, the economy will always correct itself. But the fun part about this unit is that we're going to figure out how do we fix the economy if we're the government. If we're in the Great Depression, right, consumer spending fell. Why? Because stock market crashed. Stock market was a value of all of our income, right? When the stock market crashed in 1929, everything's like, nobody had any money. Consumer spending fell. Unemployment was rampant. What did the government try to do to solve that? They tried to increase government spending to try and get out of a recessionary gap. That's the way they handled it. So we're eventually going to approach that. How does government handle that situation? But let's hold that off for another day. Today, let's take a look at a scenario here. And if you want, I would probably say graph it just for the practice of it. But assume there's an increase in government spending. What happens to price level and output in the short run? And then we're going to tackle it to the long run. So let's graph the short run effect by ourselves. That face was priceless. So graph this sucker out, just your short run change. Assume that there's an increase in government spending. Price level, GDP as our axes, QY and PLE. So we started out, would say that we are at equilibrium at our potential output, is the way we'd phrase that. Government spending increased, so what curve am I messing with? I don't even know what language that was, but I support you. AD, right? Do we go to the right or to the left? To the right. So what happened to our price level? Increased, and our quantity increased. Now that we've got this down on our graph, what is our second shift? What's our long run? Hold it in there, little fella. Hold it in. I'll come back there. What's our second shift? We use this to make the decision. Price levels increased. Think about what would workers do and how that would affect that curve. Home slice. Oh, okay. Sharing's caring. Give me a sec. I love walking. This is so much better. It's like being a person. I love it. I missed me. Thank you, sir. I would just say for the sake of the test, just graph them. I mean, put the labels on them, AS, AS1. That is amazing. And I would just say it for the test, just put an AS1. That way you know which way you're going. Boom. Here we go. Price level went up. Oh, there's inflation in the economy. Mr. Copo, what do I want? I want a raise. Give me my money, right? So if I'm going to ask for a raise, what happens to my aggregate supply? It goes to the left, right? So, oh gosh. So we're shifting to the left. Whoop, to aggregate supply 1. Boom. Cool. So, oh, whoops. I went too far. There we go. Sorry, my buttons got all mixed up on me. All right, let's do one more, and then we have 2 slides to go. Promise. Promise. All right, so if consumer expectations fall, I don't trust the economy right now. I don't know if I'm going to have a job next week. I can't treat myself today. Therefore, I am going to hold in my spending, my consumer spending plummets. What happens to price level and output in the long run? Cool. This is a fun way to phrase it. So this one's saying what happens to price level and output in the long run. They don't even care about the short run. They want to know what's going on in the long run. So step 1, graph the short run. Step 2, answer for the long run, and then address what happens to price level and output in the long run. Sure. I practice. It's helpful. Is that peanut butter and jelly? You're the man. Boom. Perfect.
So as price levels fall, right,
Yeah.
then consumers would not.
So price levels fell. So what's going to happen to aggregate supply? That'd be the reverse.
Oh, it's okay, I see it now.
See that?
Yeah.
The trick is I just keep your long run aggregate supply on there. That way it's on there. Not in the long run. In the long run, it's always going to stay where it's at. In the long run, the only thing that's going to change is price levels. In the short run, our output's going to decrease, right? But in the long run, what happens? Yeah, we're all going to return back to that long run aggregate supply. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, let's do short run first. Consumer expectations fall and consumer spending plummets. Oh, that's sad. Aggregate demand shifted to the left. In this case right here, our output went down, unemployment went up, price levels went down. People are going to want to re-enter the workforce later on that are out. Wages in the long run are totally fluid. They reflect the price level. In the long run, workers are going to become cheaper. We're a cheaper resource. Because price level went down, wages and resource prices are going to go down in the future, which would shift aggregate supply to the right. So to the right would bring us right back to our long run aggregate supply. So what happens to price level in the long run? Price level went down. It went from there to there, and then even more there. But what happened to quantity output in the long run? Well, we had that recession that we went into for a while, but the economy corrected itself, wages dropped, and we returned right back to our full employment output. So for the answer for this one, price level decreased, output in the long run remained constant. Sweet. All right, here we go. I'm not going to continue this because I think you guys catch this idea. What I wanted to do was show you economic growth and how we can do economic growth in 2 whole slides. Did you sneak out without a cameo?
I did the cameo.
Oh, okay. What up? All right, economic growth. So we're going to return to that PPC curve. You saw this test question on both Unit 1 and Unit 2 tests. Which point on our production possibility curve will encourage more economic growth in the future? A or B? A, right? If you're producing more capital goods, goods that make more goods, then your economic growth is going to be larger in the future. Every economy is going to eventually, what we hope, is going to grow. We have population growing, we have technology growing, we have better use of resources. But if you focus your economy on capital goods, your economy is going to grow larger in the future. So if we were to do an investment, we could have growth through investment. So if investment increases, what happens in the short run? Investment is aggregate demand or aggregate supply? Demand, right? C plus I. So investment increases our aggregate demand. In the short run, we know that our output grew and our price levels went up. And now we're thinking, okay, well, price level went up, but what if we were investing in stuff that makes more things? We were investing in capital goods. That makes us more productive, right? If I bought more toaster ovens for my bagel industry, or if I bought more bike stands for a bike shop, if I bought more parking structures for Petco Park, I could have more business, right? I could be more productive. So you could actually say that capital stock increases a company's output, in which case that would shift aggregate supply to the right. Oh my God, we just went off script, right? If I invest in capital stock, and this would be the only case scenario for it, if increased business investment was in capital stock, we become more productive, right? Because now I can toast more bagels, I can fix more bikes, I can park more cars at Petco Park. That makes my productivity on my aggregate supply shift to the right. Therefore, bringing my long run aggregate supply to the right. I know your mind is blown, but hold on before you throw that idea on there. Any shifter that shifts the production possibility curve will also be shifting the long run aggregate supply if they're the same curve, right? Whoa, whoa, yeah.
So pretty much, if you're looking at like the question, if blank happens and it moves demand, the LRAS isn't going to move, but if it affects supply, then the LRAS is going to move.
No, this would be an aggregate demand shift in the beginning. And I wrote it all out for you because I need to see it written down as well. So does everyone have this right here? You guys want to take a photo of that? I'm going to cramp. Okay. So an increase in consumption, any aggregate demand increase in consumer spending or government spending isn't going to increase economic growth. But if there's an aggregate demand shift that relates around investment in capital goods, then it will encourage economic growth. So you're going to notice almost every question that you're going to see is going to be an increase in consumption, increase in government spending, decrease in consumption, decrease in government spending. When it throws the I in there and business become more productive, that's when aggregate demand shifts, then aggregate supply shifts, just like having our PPC curve shift. Definitely there would be hints in that question that'll talk about long run growth. Whenever you see long run growth, then you're like, oh, he's probably trying to sneak an investment question in there on me. Sound good? Solid. All right, so that's it for the day. I don't think we need to do any more practice questions. I think our brains are done. Cool.